www.theforest.com.
Lewis walked through the forest. The bright full moon was hovering over him like a big eye in the sky. He looked around with caution, gripping his gun tightly in his hand. The hooting over the owls broke through the peaceful silence of the night. The branches of old trees scratched at him like bony hands gripping onto his clothes. A soft breeze picked up from anywhere up north, making him shiver as if he heard a howling behind him. He picked up the pace, trotting over to the fallen tree branches and trunks. He could hear the thunder in the distance, but one day he looked at the sky and it told him no rain was forthcoming. A metal bar was sticking out of the trunk and sidestepped it, inspecting it closely. It had been specks of blood from the mirror of its tip and some flesh. A sudden scream tore up into the forest, sending the birds to fly in a nearby direction. His head perked up at the sound. Familiar of it, he hitting the shore beside him. Clementine! His wheeled legs were able to carry him towards the scream, and he was going as fast as he could. Robots seemed to be slithering their way to the ground to take a hold of his ankles. As he fell more than once on his way, clearing his coat with near his shambles from the branches he had brushed against it. In the middle of the clearing was a large man kneeling over a body on the ground. Lewis aimed his gun at the man, his eyes shaking slightly. He did approach him. His feet stepped over a few branches but didn't seem to faze the man. He cleared his throat. "Who are you?" he said in a deep voice that didn't seem to belong to him. The man's head had perked up at the sound of Lewis's voice, a raspy chuckle escaping him. He stood up and turned around. Lewis's face was now darkening with horror as a realization that hit him like a truck. In front of him stood a tall man with broad shoulders. His beard was clean-shaven, with a thick brown mustache over his lips. He wore tight pants, and his white button-up shirt had a dark brown woolen sweater over it. "Hey, Lewis," he said, a deep voice with raspy. "Dad?" stuttered Lewis, stepping back. "How is he here?" He hadn't seen his father over 14 years. "Been a while, huh?" his father said, a smug smirk much like Lewis's plastered on his face. The only one that none of Lewis's charisma and filled his son with pure dead. "What are you doing here?" "Just checking the scene out," he said authentically, gesturing to the body behind him. It was Lewis noticed that it was Miles Campbell, laying on the ground with a bullet hole on his forehead, his glassy eyes staring blankly at the clouds. Blood had stained the ground and his head, turning up to the neck steep of crimson. "Nice shooting, Tex. You might just be my son after all." Lewis stared at his father, the gun shaking his head. His dad chuckled at the lost expression on Lewis's face. "What is that supposed to be?" Lewis snapped. "Haven't you noticed?" the inquiring man crossing his arms. "I wasn't sure at first you'd be more alike than you think." Lewis looked away. "I'm nothing like you, Dad," he spatted. "I never hit my own child." "Are you sure about that, kiddo?" his dad mocked, raising an eyebrow. Bro, just a few years behind Miles here proves it." "That is not the same. I had to kill him," Lewis defended himself. "He would have blown the whole plan." His father scoffed. "You sure did." He fought the same at first. "I am nothing like you piece of crap," Lewis bowled, aiming the gun at his father. The man looked down at the barrel of the gun with a bored expression. He leaned down towards Lewis with a smirk. "Think again," he whispered. "Do you want more evidence?" he said, the lawyer assuming to be a prominent posture. "Evidence? What about that woman? Was her name Lizzie? You're going to keep that from your wife?" "How do you know about—" Lewis defended himself before being cut off by his dad again. "You're dangerous, Lewis. You always are." "That's not true." "Look at him." The old man bowed pointing at Miles. Lewis's eyes fought at the body of the man that he killed in cold blood. The life had been drained from his eyes a long time ago. "How long was it since someone loved long enough? How long is it, Zach Clementine?" As if command, Miles' body disappeared and was replaced by something Lewis had only seen in his worst nightmares. Clementine laid on the ground. Her amber eyes stared blankly at him. Her clothes were covered in grime of blood. Large gashes covered her entire body and face. A trickle of blood oozed from the corner of her mouth. "Why are you showing me this?" Lewis gasped, bringing his hands up to his face. The gun fell on the ground with a thud. To answer his question came from a form of a growl. Clem's body rose slowly, her limbs stiff as her speech was gone. Her golden eyes had glazed over with a milky color, replacing her irises. A shudder coursed through Lewis's body as he stepped back in horror. "This isn't happening," he half told himself. If he did portray his words, his wife's corpse had made its way towards him. growling and extending his arms. "No, you're not real," he said, out loud as he could as he stepped back over one more time. His back hit the tree and he leaned against it anxiously. Louis looked over at his father, who had stepped to the side when Clem turned. The older man tapped his waist impatiently, reminding him of the little time he has. Louis sighed, closing his eyes. Maybe it was right. Maybe he was better off dead. He straightened up, looking at the walker in the face, the same face he'd woken up to the last 5 years with his life. Coming to the end of it when they got close to him, the walker's hands gripped his shoulders tightly, knocking him backwards onto the ground. Louis braced himself for what seems to be coming next, and what was started was Clem actually spoke. "Louis?" she whispered from far off. "Louis, wake up!" When his eyes opened, the forest around him had vanished, and his father, who had stood right in him, mocking a smile in his stupid face, had vanished. How could he feel a layer of drip of sweat dampering his dreads? One of them seemed to be falling over. Clem's face was hovering over his, but Clementine was much more livelier than her counterpart. The question presents in her amber eyes. He blinked a few times before wrapping his arms around her and pulling to him. "Oh, Clem," he breathed, burying his face in the crook of her neck. She did her best to return the gesture, even though losing its back had made it quite probophobic. She rolled over to his side, propping herself up on the elbow. "Did you have another nightmare?" she inquired immediately, a annoying look on her face. "Yeah," he muttered simply. His head hung low and sat up, rubbing the very little sleep he had in his body. It was my dad again, but this time he was there. "What do you mean?" I actually saw him this time," Louis explained. His eyes were fixed on the small mouse clutching its way on the beam of the ceiling. He showed me Miles." "Miles?" she asked, adjusting her stance. "This guy we found scouting the Right Arm compound," Louis said, looking back up at Clem. She sat cross-legged on the bed, her hands tracing small circles on her swollen stomach. He noticed that she had been doing that a lot recently. Almost a personal mentora. "Javi and I have interrogated him for information, and when he was done, I just shot him right in the head. I didn't even hesitate." Clementine pierced her lips and reaching out for her right to touch his shoulder. When her hand made contact with his skin, she felt the same warmth that she felt every time they kissed. Yes, she was his beacon, and she was the only one who could be able to pull him out of the hole and found himself in. So he hoped at least. Clementine locked his eyes with him, gold burning into brown. She cupped her left side of his face and tilting her own as well. "Lou," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know you think you're a monster, but you're not." "How do you know that?" he exclaimed, his brows neatly knitted and his eyes drifting down to his hands. "You don't even know I was like before I found you, Clem. I was in a dark place. The moment that I pulled the trigger, I felt nothing. I'm dangerous, Clem." His father's words came back to him, causing him to stinging sensation in his eyes. "Honey," she said sternly, bringing his attention back to her eyes, "I can assure you you'll be a great man. You've been an amazing boyfriend and husband to me. A perfect father figure for AJ, and you'll even be a better father to this baby," she added. She took his hand and placed it on her belly, where she could already feel the bump swelling up. "She's gonna look up to her dad, and she's gonna think the world of you. You can call that baby a she." He exclaimed Louis, covering his mouth excitedly. Clementine rolled her eyes and tugging at his lips. She hesitated for a moment, but "I may be coming around the idea of a girl, all right," she conceded. Louis smiled up at her, and even though his dreads, blowing them on them gently. "So Ruth is back on the table?" "It was never in the dining room," Clem stated, her deadpan. Louis raised an eyebrow on her, unable to contain his smile. He took his hands into hers. He kissing back in the right one. "You're amazing, you know that?" he said. "I know. Which is why I can't keep this from you," he said, suddenly startling her. He took his hands away from his grasp, eyeing him suspiciously. "What do you mean?" Louis drew a big breath, closing his eyes and letting it all out. "All right," he began, nodding. "You see, to get the information of your location, we have to run a small rescue mission for Hilltop." "I've just heard of that place," she said pensively. "Jesus was one of their leaders," he informed her. Ah, that's why. Well, Lizzie came with us on the rescue mission, he continued. At the point she got trapped with 2 walkers and I saved her, and then she tripped and I caught her. She what? She kissed me. She kissed you? Clementine asked, blinking several times. Louis raised his arms, bracing for Clem's fury. I stopped her immediately. She had some crap about her being more suited for me, and I told her off, I swear, baby. Clementine raised her eyebrows, a ghost smile on her face. If she had been so angry at Lizzie, she would have laughed it out loud. Instead, she placed a hand on Louis's shoulder. Honey, I'm not going to kill you. You're not? He asked. You still unsure? Not this time, Clem laughed. No, silly. Lee, she said, kissing his forehead. I know you, remember? I know you never cheat on me, much less tell me about it. I guess you're right, he conceded with a smile. He leaned in and placed a kiss on her lips, which she happily returned with her and handed her through his dreads, uncovering his face. She looked up at him and slanted eyes. Do you really think I was going to kill you? Well, say this is from the bottom of my heart. You can be quite scary sometimes, honey, he informed her, receiving a playful punch in the shoulder for his troubles. The following morning, Clem, Louis, and AJ were waited at the gate for Javi. All 3 of them were equipped with their backpacks and had a few days' worth of supplies. They were going to make their first trip back to Erickson since they arrived at Richmond. AJ's special day was getting closer. After all, happy early birthday, AJ, they heard Javi's voice said from behind them, a small package in his hand. He greeted the 2 adults first and handed AJ his present. Since I won't be seeing you on your actual birthday, here you go. You can't open this till you get to Erickson, got it? Okay, AJ said excitedly as he was turning 11 years old in a few days, and he was excited to see the others again. Thanks, Javi, Clem said, offering the older man a hug. She and Louis hadn't been able to procure anything for their little boy, and they had already apologized profusely. He didn't mind, but he said that he had already felt guilty. It was nothing, he said, waving a hand at the boy. You guys ready to go? Sure are, Louis said, draping an arm over Clementine and squeezing it tightly. It'll all be good seeing everyone again, right, Clem? Clem? They had lost the woman's attention for a few seconds when Clem spotted the corner of her eyes of the woman wavy black hair, shrinking gray eyes. She got out of Louis's embrace and walked straight towards Lizzie. An expression on her face told everyone who was passing her was on a warpath, so they swerved out of the way. When she got there, Lizzie had the gall to smile at her. Without a warning, Clem's fist came barreling towards the human's face. Loud thumping sound erupted from it. Lizzie was knocked flat on the ground, still dazed. She was holding her hands on her hips. Lizzie could clearly see the silhouette of Clem's baby bump against the light of the sun. Stay away from my husband, you tramp, Clem warned, her eyes dangerously low as Lizzie didn't dare get up. Clem made her way back to Louis and Javi, who had similar expressions of awe and admiration as she passed them. She blew Louis a kiss, followed by AJ out of the gate, the boy who looked at her with confusion but walked nonetheless. Louis and Javi shared a puzzled look for a moment before Louis nodded at the older man and followed his wife. He caught up to her quickly and slowed his pace to match hers. He wrapped his arms over Clementine's shoulder and chuckled. I didn't expect that, he commented, looking down at her. Well, I'm full of surprises, she told him, a mischief glint on her eyes, and she eyed him on his side. And no one touches my Louis. I can't touch Louis, AJ called ahead of them, cocking his head towards the side. Clem and Louis shared a laugh, shaking their heads. Of course you can, Clem assured him, ruffling his growing afro. It's getting time for a haircut, she thought. The trio walked through the forest for 3 days, taking long breaks when nightfall came. Louis insisted they may take all guard shifts, but by the 3rd night he was clearly not fit for the task. Clem stepped in towards him for his form, shriveling up at the spot due to exhaustion. I'll take tonight, she said. He couldn't argue with this as his head fell on the makeshift pillow he placed on a tree trunk beside him. The following morning they arrived at the school. At last AJ's birthday was upon them. He could barely hold his excitement as they waited outside the gates of Erickson. A few minutes later, the barred gate creaked open, revealing AJ's best friend 10. Happy birthday, AJ! He exclaimed, offering his friend a short hug. He hugged Louis and Clem as well, not missing the chance to ask about the baby. The baby's doing fine, thanks, 10, Clem said as one of her hands were on her belly. Her movement was beginning to become more restricted as she grew her size. According to Eleanor, in a few months, she would not be able to travel too far. Who knew being a pregnant woman was this much work, she thought. Ten had led them through the empty courtyard, hushing AJ when they asked where everyone is. They all walked inside the admin building, where the rest of the Erickson inhabitants were waiting for them. Ruby and Asim were at the front. Big smiles were on their faces. The boy received hugs and presents from everyone, thanking them all of them. The music room had been turned into a small party lounge. One of the courtyard tables had been brought aside for a few plates of deer and rabbit, and with their glasses either full of water or old liquor, Omar approached the boy at the point, wishing him a happy birthday. His right hand held a glass of brown substance. AJ can only assume it was alcohol. "Thanks, Omar," said AJ, offering the old man a hug. "I'm sorry for not being able to make a cake this year," the man apologized, frowning. "We ran out of flour a few weeks ago." "It's okay," AJ said, a smile on his face. "The only fact that they were there with him today, though. I like deer, though," he said, taking yet another helping from the next table beside him. "Thank you, AJ. Those little scares have been too scarce. They've been too scarce recently," he commented. "But you're worth it, little man." He ruffled AJ's hair, leaving him to his devices. When Omar left, AJ remembered the package he was holding in the back pocket. He took it out, examining the wrapping paper. It seemed to consist of primitive old newspapers. Twisting around a small box and had 3 inches just wide for 4 inches long, he ripped the paper and opening the box immediately after. Inside was a small watch, and it was a leather strap next to a bronze case, and the frame was gold-plated. Going around the face of it, the silver handles were a little worn off the edges, but otherwise, they worked well. AJ had turned the watch into his hands, finding the phrase in this language that he didn't recognize. Nice. Prudebe jisquiza aki juga tuhula. He scrunched up his nose and turned to concentration, trying to remember having learned those words, but nothing came to mind. Maybe Lewis would know. He searched in the room for his adopted father, frowning when he couldn't find him. Asim stood a few feet away, talking to Ruby. He tapped on the man on the shoulder, making him turn and smile at the boy. "Hey, Asim, have you seen Lewis?" "I think I saw him and Clem go to their room," he said. "Clem said something about not feeling well after she ate the deer. I think Omar was a little offended, actually," he said. Ruby chuckled together, leaving AJ out of the loop. He apologized to AJ once more. AJ frowned, looking down at the watch in his hands. He pocketed it and rushed out of the music room, leaving Asim to talk to his girlfriend. The boy marched through the halls, heading through Clem and Lewis's room. When he opened it, he saw the door was ajar, a faint light escaping from the crack. Before he could burst in, he heard voices coming from inside. "You feeling a bit better?" Lewis's ass went through the crack, stopping him in his tracks. "I guess," Clem replied with her voice hoarse. "Unless you count throwing up your lunch better." "Not the word I use, but close though," Lewis said cheerfully. He had always tried to brighten up the mood. What was it in the deer?" Clem exclaimed. "Don't say it too loud, least Omar comes to finish you off." AJ darted a sneak peek through the room. Beyond it had changed much since the last time they'd been there. And a twisted guitar and against the drawer by Clem's bed. Clem belayed herself on the bunk beds, her right hand cleaning desperately on the edge of the metal bucket. Her eyes were pale, and her smiling was nonetheless. "Is she sick?" AJ thought nervously. Lewis had been sitting on the chair on the bed, holding her left hand with both of his own. His trench coat was draped over Clem's shivering body. Why would she be shivering in the middle of summer? Lewis bent down and kissed her fingers, making her smile once more. "Your baby is taking a toll on you, huh?" "A little," she agreed, her gag flexing, making her reach for the bucket. Fortunately, nothing came out. "But she's worth it and more." Lewis placed one of his hands on her stomach, looking at her with a face of pure adoration. "When did we get so lucky?" he whispered, drawing small circles around his thumb. "I honestly don't know." AJ kept looking at the couple and stared at each other, their eyes seemingly sparkling a lot. At one point, Lewis snapped his fingers and turned to his seat, grabbing the guitar at the mast. He propped up on his leg, strumming through the strings softly. "You want me to play a song to help your stomach ache?" "I don't think that's how it works, but give it a try," she teased, laying back down on the pillows and closing her eyes. "Just nothing country this time," she urged, getting the playful slap on the shoulder from Lewis. "You wound me." Lewis cleared his throat, strumming the strings once more and placing the fingers amongst the mast. AJ had asked him to teach him not to play, but unfortunately his fingers were still a bit too far for that guitar, so he settled in for the piano in the meantime. Lewis began a melody as its notes were high and heavenly. AJ stared at the guitar at the freckled man, effortlessly plucked in the strings against that time. Clem had hummed the song as the melody picked up, having to hear the song 1,000 times. AJ had heard it a couple times, for this time Lewis was playing with much more destro than normal. As he reached for his stanza, he cleared his throat. "Oh, here comes the sun, do-do-do-do." Clem hummed constantly. Her voice still hoarse, her eyes remained closed as Lewis began to sing. "Here comes the sun, I say, it's all right." Lewis looked down at his wife, beaming a smile on her lips. Even AJ could see his own eyes were bright with joy. "Little darling, it's been a long, cold, lonely winter. Little darling, it feels like years since you've been here. Here comes the sun, here comes the sun, and I say it's all right." He closed his eyes, seemingly focusing on playing his song, and another rather complicated a bit came. AJ was not looking at him, although his eyes were glued to his adoptive mother, humming happily as their husband serenaded her. He noticed that her hands were on her belly, her thumbs drawing circles at the rhythm of the song. "Little darling," the smiles returning to the faces. "Little darling, it seems like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun." The couple sang in illusion, Lewis's metallic voice clashing with Clem's raspy one. Once they didn't have in mind, though. "Here comes the sun, I say." Lewis paused for a moment, his arms covering all 6 of the strings. He looked down at Clem, whose face had regained some sort of color than she once did, almost as if they practiced it. They had reached out for each other, holding the hands in between them. He leaned against the pillow and planted a soft kiss on her lips. AJ scrunched up his nose at the sight. She let out a satisfied hum, tilting her head as she gazed into his eyes. They had nodded their trace, seemingly counting down, and sang the last lyric. "It's all right."
Why, hello there, my little pretties. It's me, the Shadow Lioness. I hope you all enjoy my video of creepypasta. So, without further ado, if you liked the video, please leave a like. And if you want to survive my cave of terror, please hit the subscribe button down below. Leave a comment in the comment section down below. Donate to my Patreon when you can. And the only way you're going to survive me in the cave is you're going to have to sub to me and press the bell for notifications so you'll get to know when I upload. Well, without further ado, my little pretties, I'll see you in the next video. Sweet dreams.